What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Jumping on here to preview week 13. Man, the season is just flying by. Pittsburgh Steelers 6-5 and back on top of the AFC North thanks to Cincinnati going and knocking off Baltimore on Thanksgiving. They're going to be hosting the 7-4 Buffalo Bills. Buffalo currently the seventh seed in the AFC playoff picture. So this game should be really, really exciting. I think Pittsburgh's coming into this one as home underdogs, which is a little bit unusual for a Mike Tomlin team, but I think you kind of understand that a little bit when you look at these two teams. But I definitely expect this game to be relatively close, and there's a lot of playoff implications as well, especially Buffalo coming off a loss, 10 days rest. They took a real beating against the Houston Texans. So a lot to break down with this one. Coming into the season, I probably would have said that I would have bet heavily on the Bills in this matchup, just the way that Josh Allen in particular has performed against the Steelers in the majority of those matchups. But I think there's some elements of this game that are going to keep it closer than I think some people may be expecting. So we'll see what happens with that. But just before we get started with the preview, if you guys could do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment. Let me see those score predictions. All that stuff is greatly appreciated on my end. Let's jump into the injury report real quick for the Steelers. Relatively good, clean bill of health. The two exceptions to that, no Broderick Jones. They classified him, I think, on the broadcast like last week as a stinger, but I think it's probably a little bit more serious than that. He's going to be out with a neck injury. Him and Derek Harmon were both ruled out early in the week, so could be things that linger more than just this weekend. Harmon was out with the knee injury, but I think they said it was a different injury than the one that he missed time with earlier in his rookie season. So, with Broderick, they are going to be asking Andrus Peat to go play left tackle. Obviously, you don't feel great about that, but Arthur Smith has shown a nice ability to protect the left tackle spot throughout the season. He's given Broderick Jones a ton of help. Not just with getting under center, running the football, a lot of close formations, chip help, and things of that nature. And I expect them to do the same for Peat, like they've done for Broderick throughout the season. It's kind of helped that at the right tackle spot, Troy Fautanu has really been able to hold his own more so on an island, and the ball's coming out quickly with Aaron Rodgers back in the fold. And with Rodgers, he is going to be playing, I believe, with a cast. It's going to be interesting to see. One of the things I always kind of worry about is like center, like QC exchanges, like under center. I think being able to get under center is going to be big in this one. If they can't get under center, you might see a little bit more pistol, just so you can get into some of your play action stuff. But I just worry a little bit about just like ball security in general with stuff like that. Obviously it's not throwing hands. I don't expect it to affect that area too much, just because you want them to be able to hand off with both hands and then not lose the football. Turnover is a big deal in this one as well. So we'll see what that looks like. But it sounds like Rodgers, all systems go, no worries from the Steelers' perspective. So pretty good injury report from them. The same cannot be said for the Bills. They are really, really banged up in this one. They're going to be down both of their tackles. And that's significant because one, Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins, one of the better tackle duos in the entire NFL. Those guys were playing definitely banged up last week when Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter kind of had their way with them in that Texans game. I think the other thing that kind of sticks out is Joe Brady, his philosophy in general from an offensive standpoint is just trying to get as many guys out into the route progression as possible. It's a lot of five-man protections. Just historically, if you watch their film over the season, obviously you can't do that with two backup tackles in the game. So how the Bills adjust is going to make for a really interesting game from a stylistic standpoint. There, like I said, 10 days to approach this game and game plan. I'm sure they're going to have something up their sleeve in that regard. But, TJ Watt, Nick Herbig, Alex Highsmith is back for this game as well. Going up against backup tackles, that's, surely a matchup that's going to, play into the Steelers' favor in that regard. Dalton Kincaid's questionable with a hamstring injury. That's going to be big to see if he goes or not. We'll see. He practiced, I think, a little bit this week. He was a limited participant on Friday, so those are always a little bit tricky. Josh Palmer with an ankle injury, I think he got hurt in practice. He was limited as well, so could be down a couple of their better weapons, along with Khalil Shakir. He's going to be in this one, but those are kind of the top names to watch for Buffalo's perspective. But yeah, from a linebacker's perspective, Terrell Bernard is going to be out as well with an elbow injury. He's been really banged up all season long. So Yeah, Buffalo's coming into this thing like walking in wounded. Josh Allen's been a little bit beat up. I think we kind of can start with when the Bills have the football. From Buffalo's perspective, I already mentioned just like kind of how their offense functions. It runs through James Cook, it runs through Josh Allen. Allen is still playing at a pretty high level this year, probably just like a step down from like his MVP caliber season. You look at some of the numbers from Allen, and I think he's still like top 10, top five in EPA per drop back, success rate, and all of those things. I think number one thing that stands out with Josh is just like obviously the arm strength is unbelievable, but just the creation ability, he's really improved, like working from the pocket to where he doesn't have to be like Professor Chaos all the time. But Allen has, like I said, he's been taking a beating. He's seventh in EPA per drop back this year. One of the things that teams have really done to kind of counter what the Steelers do defensively is just get the ball out quickly. On quick throws, Allen's fifth in EPA per drop back, but that drops to 12th when he holds the ball for more than 2.5 seconds. He's had to throw the ball or hold on to the ball a little bit more this year, just because they don't have a ton of weapons. They do see a decent amount of single high, and a lot of that's just because teams are not scared of like who they're throwing out there on the perimeter. Like Gabe Davis is back on the fold. Keon Coleman, their high draft pick from last year, he's been benched. Now it looks like he may have to dress just out of necessity from an injury standpoint. But they don't have a lot of guys that are creating a lot of separation on the boundary. You look at it man to man, those guys just don't separate all that well. Most of their production comes over the middle of the field. They're a top 10 middle of the field passing team, and the Steelers have been a little bit susceptible, especially in recent weeks. You go back and watch the Bears film. Between the numbers in that intermediate area, they can definitely give up some plays in that regard. But just from an offensive perspective, they're second in EPA per play. They're sixth in success rate. So it's like there's a lot of like talk, I feel like, in the national media, and just like even like Bills fans like freaking out, like what's wrong with the offense? But like all the numbers still say, even though it's tailed off a little bit over the last month, they've had some struggles, played some really good defenses. Houston, arguably the best defense in the league last week. They're still top five in a lot of statistics. Early down EPA, they're third. Early down success rate, they're fifth. Passing success rate. One of the things that with Josh Allen at quarterback that you're always going to be able to count on is explosive plays. Like they're the number one explosive pass team in the NFL. It's like them and the Bears. We saw that really be a difference maker last week. Chicago ended up with 9 explosive plays to the Steelers 4. They ended up winning the game, even though the quarterback Caleb Williams didn't play particularly well in that game. I mentioned kind of like making Josh hold on to the football. It's definitely something that he is capable of doing, and he can do it at a really high level. And sometimes he can just go supernova, put the Superman cape on, and all that stuff. The thing that has happened this year when he's done that is there's been more turnovers. So he's got 9 touchdowns, 9 interceptions on longer developing pass plays. He's also taken 25 sacks. So his pressure to sack ratio is up there near like 20%. That's relatively high for a quarterback anytime you get in that 20% territory. But even like last year, Josh Allen had the lowest pressure to sack ratio in the entire NFL. So it's been a little bit difficult for him to navigate the pocket. I think some of that is Allen trying to play a little bit more hero ball just because of the lack of weaponry on the perimeter. But one of the things that they do have going for them is a run game that is incredibly explosive, and just overall like really really consistent. You look at some of the numbers; they're second in rushing EPA per play, they're fourth in rushing success rate, sixth in explosive run rate. James Cook, he's broken 45 tackles this season. That's like fifth most among running backs on run plays. So Cook, to me, when I watch him on film, the vision it's just gotten better and better and better. Like he's got really good contact balance. But I think like one of the subtle things, like you watch him, the more and more you appreciate, because like the way that he kind of glides through the line of scrimmage. I always talk about that when we talk about draft prospects. Is trying to understand, guys that burst through the hole and can see it and cut at a really high speed and that lower body flexibility. Cook has that and then some, and he can also be used as a receiver. One of the interesting things that I'll be looking for in this particular matchup would be, do the Bills change course a little bit and go with a little bit more like heavier personnel against the Steelers, kind of similar to what Chicago did a little bit last week, where they kind of were messing with the Steelers from a formational perspective, personnel perspective, if you would. Like they would get heavy and throw the ball. So the way that the Steelers have been attacking teams when they want to go 12 personnel, they've been going more like even fronts and bringing all three linebackers on the field. Well, one of the things that the Steelers have kind of ran into is like they're really susceptible to play action, even though the Bears didn't hit on all those last week. Malik Harrison and Peyton Wilson, those guys are like quick trigger downhill guys. And once they get moving towards the line of scrimmage, they're not roboting out and trying to get to the middle of the field. So there's just a lot of space at the second level. One of the things that's kind of weird to me, and maybe this does speak to some of the complaints that I think Bills fans have about the Joe Brady offense, is the Bills are under center a lot, but they don't use play action, which is kind of counterintuitive, especially like when you look at just all the things that Josh Allen, like he's like one of those alien type quarterbacks. Like you could pretty much do whatever you want with him, but they're under center a decent amount at the seventh highest rate, almost 45% of their plays. They're fourth at EPA under center, but they're only 29th in play action rate, which is kind of strange, especially with like all the tight ends that they've got at their disposal. But they're seventh in EPA per dropback whenever they do get into their play action stuff. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. They kind of rely on bunches, stacks, you know, crossers, things like that. They run a ton of mesh concepts. They kind of have to schematically generate separation for the receivers because they don't get it on their own. Now, I don't think that this passing game is like overwhelmingly diverse or anything like that. Another one of their concepts that they like is it's called China. I've got a video on this on my channel, I think somewhere, but basically it's a trips concept that they run, and the outer two most wide receivers, so the one and the two, run these like short 5 yard in routes. And then the number three receiver, sometimes this is Kincaid, sometimes this is Khalil Shakir. They'll either run like a 7 route, so a corner if it's middle field closed. So if you're playing some type of man or cover three, they'll run a corner route from that alignment. Or if it's middle field open, too high, they'll end up running kind of a post route or some sort of bender to the middle of the field. And Allen's really comfortable with that play. But I swear, like those two concepts, along with some of the screen stuff that they do, like make up like the majority of the stuff that they do in the passing game, which is kind of crazy for a team like the Steelers who don't run an overwhelming amount of like concepts in the passing game. The Bills are right there in the same kind of hemisphere as far as menu goes, in my opinion. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much like sums up the Bills offense more than anything else. Like I said, I think the big thing with the Bills is tight ends like Dalton Kincaid. When he's in the game, that's kind of a tell that they're trying to pass the ball. He's essentially a receiver for them. They do have a guy, I think his name's Spencer Hawes. He's a blocking tight end for them. He's a rookie. He's been really impactful when he's been on the field. So even without their tackles, the Bills interior of their offensive line with Osiris Torrance and those guys, like they can create displacement up front. Some of the stuff that, Cook does after contact is really impressive, but they do move people as well. They run zone, they run gap. Mid zone is like one of their probably best concepts. Cook sees that extremely well from a vision standpoint. But I think those blocking tight ends could come in to play in this one just because of how the Steelers have kind of struggled, particularly against perimeter runs this year. You look at Pittsburgh's defense, they are, let's see, 29th in EPA per play on perimeter runs. They're a little bit better defending runs in between the tackles, but that is something to kind of keep an eye on in this one, just because I think there's going to be a lot of rushing attempts, just because it's going to be a little cold. I think there might be a little rain. So we'll see how that plays out. But the Steelers' ability to stop the run and also prevent explosive plays is going to be huge in this one, just because of like that's what Buffalo likes to do. They like to try to stay in those neutral downs. You always got to be aware of Josh Allen's legs as well. Not as many like design runs. I think they typically want to save those for like kind of gotta have it moments like AFC playoffs and things of that nature. But he's averaging like 3 scrambles a game. So, Steelers do a pretty good job with that stuff in general, but he has hurt them before. I think back to that playoff game a couple years ago as well. So pretty much it. All you need to know, I feel like, about the Bills offense. Now, the Bills defense is a different story, man. To be honest with you, I knew the Bills have been struggling defensively just from like my live viewings of them. But I think going back and watching the film, there was definitely some eye-opening stuff. You look at it, EPA per play, they're 20th. They're actually 26th over the past month or so. They're 10th in success rate. So decent. I would say, but they do give up some explosive passes. Some of that is like yards after catch stuff. But they're the 30th in rushing EPA per play. They're 31st over the past month. They're 25th in rushing success rate. You could just run the ball really at will on this defense, to be completely honest with you. However, you want to get it done, you should be able to get it done. The Steelers' rushing attack has been good. It's been a top 10 unit, especially really since like week 2 or week 3, doing a lot with like the heavier personnel, getting Spencer Anderson involved, getting Darnell Washington involved in the game. And I think that's kind of going to be one of the things that I'm going to be looking for because, the Bills, they've really struggled when teams have got heavy against them. You think back to how they typically like to operate, it's more nickel. They're playing a little bit more base, a little bit more dime this year, actually, which is interesting as well in this one. But against 12 and 13 personnel that like Arthur Smith really leans on, they're 31st in EPA per play against that. So they're like their linebackers are lighter guys. Their backs, and just their second, third level in general. My number one takeaway when I was going back and watching some of the cut ups was just that this defense is slow. They are really, really slow. So run the rock. Another thing that kind of speaks to, I think some differences in like the missed tackle numbers aren't terrible for the Bills, but if you look at some of their metrics, and I kind of felt this just like looking at some of the film too. But they're allowing 4.3 yards after contact this year. That's actually over half a yard worse than the Atlanta Falcons, who are 31st in the NFL. So they've been extremely bad. You talk about like ripping explosive runs. The Steelers have been efficient in the run game, but haven't generated a ton of explosives. This would be a great week to change that, especially with some of the speed deficiencies that the Bills have at the second level with those linebackers. Another thing that I've noticed just on film watching, this team really struggles, especially at the second level, to defend like any sort of like misdirection, motion, wind back plays, jet motions, anything of that nature, anything to get like to capture the eyes of the linebackers is really beneficial. And I think some of the numbers kind of back that up as well. When they are defending motion, I think I wrote this down somewhere. They're 23rd in defending motion this year in terms of like EPA. But yeah, they're also not good at defending play action. The Steelers not a heavy play action team, but they will do it a little bit. So maybe you can catch a middle of the field explosive or something like that. Buffalo does play the second highest amount of middle field open coverages. So I like to keep two safeties deep. This is a team that does not play a ton of cover one. They want to live in their zone coverage looks. On the back end, I think the safeties have stabled out a little bit. It was a significant issue in the first like month or two of the season. They've made some changes. They brought back Jordan Poyer. He's a veteran who knows the defense, so at least you're not going to get beaten by some coverage busts that they were susceptible to early in the season. Cole Bishop's actually played pretty well over the past 6 weeks. To be honest with you, I thought he was terrible to begin the season. He's been playing a lot better. Christian Benford, I still like. He was on my All Pro ballot last year. He's a really good cornerback. He actually picked off Rodgers last year in the game where this Week 17 game, I think he undercut a dig route. And I went back and watched that game just because I wanted to get a feel for how they may play Rodgers. A lot of too high, a lot of zone stuff, but they did play some two man on third downs. And you actually look at the numbers, they've actually played two man or bracket coverages on 10% of plays this year. You don't see two man a lot against most quarterbacks. The only guys who really see it very much are guys who really can't run. Rodgers kind of a statue at this point in his career. So look for that as well, especially on like third and medium, third and long. They may do some bracket stuff, some two man, especially because the Steelers kind of have not really been able to show that they trust any of their guys outside of DK Metcalf to really win consistently one-on-one. And it's a way that teams have been able to kind of take him out of the game. Metcalf actually hasn't gone over like 55 yards in the past, I think 5 or 6 matchups. So I expect Benford to see a lot of Metcalf in this game, but Trey White's their other corner. They're working in Maxwell Harrison. Harrison is a really fast player who likes to play off coverage. He's got really light feet, but he is a little bit of a gambler. He's been out of position a couple times. It hasn't really bitten them a ton. Like I said, they're pretty decent in terms of like defending the deep ball. You look at like explosives and things like that over the top. That's not really how you get after this defense. But one of the things that the Bills defense does do extremely well is defend quick passes. They're one of the top 10 teams in the league at defending like quick throws. So just how Rodgers likes to operate, get the ball out quick to the flats, to the perimeter, and things of that nature to the playmakers. And like I said, Buffalo's not a terrible tackling team, but they will allow some like yards after the catch, yards after contact. So I'm sure the plan of attack for the Steelers passing game will be very similar. But this is one matchup where I kind of like go into it thinking like they should run the ball like 40 times. I think the kind of pathway to the Steelers like pulling off a home upset here would really just to be to keep this thing close, keep it ugly. You're going to need to find some semblance of explosive plays. If you're not going to generate it through the deep passing game, it needs to come in the run game. It needs to come on those quick throws, maybe get something over the middle to where you could pop something. That's one of the things that's kind of been frustrating about the Steelers offense is because the metrics aren't terrible, like especially the rushing metrics. Like they've been an efficient rundown team. They're 15th in points per drive right now too. So they've overachieved in terms of what the Steelers have actually invested on the offensive side of the ball, but they just haven't been able to find those explosive plays. And when you look at it, it's just really difficult to continuously try to like rip off 10, 11, 12 play touchdown drives. It's hard to do that in the NFL. And that's honestly like how defensive coordinators want you to play. They want to keep a lid on everything and force you to be perfect repeatedly. And when you can't generate those like, big plays and stuff like that, it's difficult to do because your margin for error just really decreases. So, turnover margin is always a big thing for the Steelers, but I'll continue to talk about it really until I'm blue in the face. But got to generate some more explosive. They've lost that battle, and I think that's a really big reason that they're 6-5. But the window is really open for them in this game in particular, to run the football, to keep it close. I actually think that the Steelers do some things that could make this game really interesting. Buffalo does get pressure on the quarterback at a reasonably high rate. I think they're like middle of the pack ish in pressure rate. Actually, a little bit better than that. They're eighth, getting pressure on 33% of their dropbacks. The Steelers actually have allowed the lowest pressure rate in the league this season. You look at it. Even if you exclude all the quick passing that the Steelers and Rodgers like to do, they're still third in success rate on throws that take over 2.5 seconds. So I think that really speaks to the trajectory of the offensive line. I really think that Zach Frazier played a heck of a game last week against the Bears. Troy Fautanu was awesome as well. Him and Montez Sweat got matched up, I think probably only like a half dozen times to where I would call it like true dropback scenarios. And I think Fautanu won every single one of them convincingly. I know Sweat had a couple sacks, but those were like really like them leaving him one-on-one with Darnell Washington. I think those were like more quarterback inflicted, but I don't anticipate Rodgers to play like, as poorly as Mason did last week. I thought the film was really rough when going back through that rewatch. So, trying to get the tight ends involved will also be a nice like plan of attack in this game in particular. Like I said, the second level defenders, man, Matt Milano, even like Taron Johnson, guys who I think have been good players throughout the course of their careers, they just don't look the same to me on film. So whether it's injuries, whether it's age or anything like that, I just think that this Bills defense isn't as quite as strong as it has been in years past. But you can't overlook the impact of Sean McDermott. I mean, he is a defensive minded head coach, play caller. They've had some good individualized game plans this year. They had a really good game plan against Patrick Mahomes, but they shut him down and kind of threw the kitchen sink at them early in the season. So, that's something. But they've given up. I think they've given up like 3 or 4 rushers over 180 rushing yards this year. So it would be a really nice game for Jalen Warren to have a career high in rushing yards or something like that. And I'm optimistic that they'll be able to get it done. I've really been impressed by some of the stuff that the Steelers have done schematically in the run game. Introducing more like gap stuff, more counter, more power, things of that nature. And, seeing Arthur Smith being at least a little bit more willing to evolve in that regard to kind of make up for some of the lack of versatility in the passing game has been at least a nice counter to kind of keep them at a competent level. But Steelers are at home, play a little bit better at home, especially defensively. Again, turnovers, explosive plays, run the freaking football. But it should be a really fun game. I always enjoy this matchup. I like watching Josh Allen play as well. So, but yeah, I think that's pretty much all that I got for this matchup in particular. Don't forget, if you guys are interested in more content from me, consider becoming a member to the channel. It's only $4 a month. You get a lot more a lot more content from me, including the Yins No Ball podcast. This week, John Ledyard and I went back and we did some offseason do-overs. We looked at some of the decisions that the Steelers made over the offseason, trading for DK Metcalf, subsequently extending him, the TJ Watt extension. We look at retaining Mike Tomlin. A lot of those decisions that they made, where those kind of stand, and kind of like more of we've been doing some like bigger picture, like team building type of stuff. I think we recorded for like an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 30 minutes, or something like that. So if you're interested in my thoughts on that type of stuff, consider becoming a channel member. There's a lot of content behind the paywall that I think you guys would like, and I will be back next week, hopefully doing some draft stuff. I'll also be back after the game. It's a 4:25 kick, so maybe like halftime of the Sunday Night Football, if not game, or early on Monday for the recap. But I will definitely keep you guys posted. Really fun day of college football as well, so I'm sure you guys are locked in to that. So I will check you guys very soon. Peace and love.